trap. I welcome you to my chat today, which is entitled Global Issues Service Summit, Creating a Vision for Sustainable Change in Africa. I sincerely hope you will walk away with some lasting nugget that will nourish you in one way, shape, or form. Failing that, will be used in somewhat creative way to convince others to steer a wide path away from such traps in the future. My name is Michael Lees, and I am talking to you right now from Thual, Saudi Arabia, on the campus of the King Abdullah University of Science and Technology. We're more or less due east of the border between Egypt and Sudan, which is directly across the Red Sea from us, about 250 miles away. I would also like to introduce Sharon Peters, our moderator for the session and an exceptional friend, with whom, in the not-too-distant past, I had the great pleasure to explore Swaziland. Thanks for helping out today, Sharon. I know you just finished a full day of work at the American International School of Mozambique and are supporting a bunch of teams of students in this conference as well. I appreciate your help here. Before we start, I just want to give you a little overview of where we're headed. I have a bit of a slideshow to support what will largely be a narrative of how the Service Summit started, how it has grown, and where I think it should be headed. We'll close with a collection of pictures from various summits to give you a taste of the experience, and during that time we can have a Q&A as you feel the need. I would like to invite you to carry on the conversation beyond this forum, however. The final slides have a list of links as well as my email address. It would be my great pleasure to continue this relationship, and I sincerely do hope that I'm accurate in the use of that word after we depart today. Are there any pressing questions before we start? So far, all is good. Maybe if you could press your smiley face on the menu panel there to indicate that everything's okay. Thank you, Lisa. Andy, Beth, there we go. Good. Okay, so looks like we're getting some responses that everything's okay. So let's begin. As a young man in my teens and early 20s, it is safe to say I was very selfish, rather immature, completely unempathetic, entirely self-absorbed, and some would say an arrogant bastard. While there are those that probably continue to hold such feelings, this is cause for another keynote address altogether. Had you asked me 4 decades ago where I would be right now or to predict the most influential and significant events of my life, there is little chance that I would have come up with an accurate answer. There's even less chance that I would have said a career in education and with a particular bent towards service learning. Yet, here I am, passionate about service learning, inspired by the impact we can all have in addressing the issues that matter the most, and tickled by the phenomenon of bringing people together in common purpose. I'm almost as surprised now as I would have been then had anyone suggested such an unlikely future. However, when I look back, way back, there is actually some measure of method to the madness. I recall quite distinctly, although I didn't recognize it at the time, a formative event in my life, when in my father's attempt to build empathy in his family and to address the injustices in the world, he came home one day around the Christmas holidays and suggested we invite a homeless person over for dinner. As was my natural inclination, based on my sheltered teenage suburban life in Canada, I responded with incredulity and mocked my father with laughter, and my siblings helped out as well. I'm here to tell you I'm not terribly proud of this admission, but I think it's important in setting a context for future events. We were kids who enjoyed laughter, often at the expense of others, which in itself was incredible because we did not learn that from our parents, that's for sure. Nevertheless, we thought our father was pretty funny that day. His unintentional sense of humor was confirmed by 2 more repeated attempts over the next couple of years to enlighten his children and to bring holiday cheer to someone less fortunate than ourselves. Although those attempts ultimately failed to achieve their immediate objectives, it is my belief now that they covertly planted a seed that would ultimately germinate when the conditions were right in my life. One thing I always knew as a kid was that I was not going to be living in suburban Mississauga for the rest of my life. Through the lens of Jacques Cousteau and Mutual of Omaha's Wild Kingdom and through the pages of National Geographic magazine, I knew that my life would lead abroad to far-off lands and adventure. What I never expected was that that seed my father had planted would someday take root. After taking a year off to travel after high school and then graduating with a degree in anthropology, a major which satisfied my appetite for the exotic, I had that, okay, what am I going to be when I grow up decision, and more importantly, how do I get back overseas? In response, and with no viable plan, I entered an aviation and flight technology program with the intention to fly my way around the world. Unfortunately, the airline industry in Canada, upon graduation, was not cooperating, and I settled for Plan B. Go into teaching in order to get abroad. My wife was already a teacher, so this seemed pretty logical. In order to beef up my applications for teachers' college, I did some volunteer stints. They were largely self-serving, but somehow satisfying experiences. However, it is safe to say that at that time in my life, I was not doing it to satisfy some innate need to connect with the needy. Not much had changed from my teenage years. That all changed, however, after I graduated from teachers' college, at least a little, when we accepted our first overseas jobs in Colombia, South America, also the place where our 2 girls were born. There, we became immersed in a new land, a new culture, a new experience, and where the immediacy and pervasiveness of poverty was no longer viewed from the safety of a television screen or read in the pages of a magazine. It was readily apparent and all around us. We tried our hand at a grand humanitarian gesture and decided to sponsor a needy Colombian child's education. It was safe, did not require too much effort, and it felt pretty good. It was there that that dormant seed began to make itself known, but only slightly. After 4 years in Colombia, we moved to the Ivory Coast in West Africa. For me, this marked the point of no return. This was different, completely different. This was Africa. It marked the exact place and instant where my life would forever be changed. During our tenure there, we had the great privilege to work with Barb Weaven, an exceptional biology teacher who ran an award-winning community service program. One of her many successful initiatives was the annual oral polio vaccine drive in partnership with the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. For a full day, teams of 3 to 4 people would scour the bowels of the city in search of young children to vaccinate, thereby preventing them from contracting this prevalent, debilitating, yet easily preventable disease. The street corners were filled with polio victims who were contorted into impossible shapes from this crippling disease. It seemed simple. Take a day, let's go check out the city, and help some needy people along the way. Pretty cool. Kind of like an adventure. Well, we entered people's homes and shacks and bedrooms. We debated and cajoled and educated and begged parents to have access to their children so that we could protect them from this scourge. And I actually remember the exact child, the exact moment when I felt that seed begin to sprout. We had just finished convincing, in our comically limited French, a young mother who knew absolutely nothing about vaccines or viruses. She had reluctantly allowed us access into the inner sanctum of her impossibly small hovel of an apartment and presented her screaming 9-month-old daughter to these uninvited white strangers who promised some invisible talisman to protect her screaming infant. I remember distinctly holding that squirming and resistant bundle of babyhood, and almost in direct contradiction to the struggling mass of flesh, gently administering 2 pink drops of liquid into the child's wailing mouth. And then she stopped crying. She just stopped and looked up with an expression almost like curiosity. Although I am far from what you would call a religious man, that may have been the closest I have come in my life. It was almost like a baptism of sorts, a cleansing, a release. Indeed, more for me than for that child. I don't want to over-dramatize the experience, but in a rather comical way, I felt like the Grinch who stole Christmas, who feels, at the end of the runaway sled scene, his heart begin to grow. Because it was at that moment that I truly understood that my actions, and by extension, our collective actions, simple as they may be, could have such a profound effect on others and indeed ourselves. And that was a true beginning of my exponential learning curve in service learning and global issues education, which I'm still enjoying today. As foundational as that event was, I think it pales in comparison to the level of appreciation I have now for the meaning of empathy and reciprocity and partnerships and the sheer scale and magnitude of what we can accomplish when we work together to effect change. While I'm appreciative that I have learned so much in these areas, I am humbled to admit that I have so much farther to go. And that is why I'm so excited to be part of this Global Education Collaborative, because its mission speaks directly to what I have come to learn. After 3 years in the Ivory Coast and experiencing military coups, tear gas riots, and witnessing the heartbreaking inception of a country on the brink of implosion through civil war, we left to go to China. Armed with some of the lessons I had learned in Africa, I naively volunteered my services as the community service coordinator of a K-9 oil company school and enjoyed unprecedented freedom to experiment with community service initiatives. At the same time, I had started my master's, and my thesis was an action research project focusing on evaluating the school's community service program. During that period of research, my understanding of service learning matured, and I began to look at the issues more systemically. For example, as a new coordinator trying to devise meaningful activities for students, I became frustrated that I had no telephone numbers to the orphanage, I had no connections to the mayor's office to get permission to do a mountain cleanup, I had no name for the person responsible for Habitat for Humanity China. I had no information, no connections, no idea what the hell I was doing. I had nothing. What I did see, however, were needs. Lots and lots of community needs. And at the same time, lots and lots of different people wanting to do something about those very same needs. Take the orphanage, for example. There were governmental agencies responsible for this. There were NGOs, local and international, focused on finding families for orphans. There were socially responsible corporations donating money towards addressing this issue, and there were countless community service coordinators like me at international schools trying desperately to find meaningful activities for their students to address those same community needs. But interestingly enough, none of those organizations or individuals were working together or communicating with each other to target the issue or the issues in any sort of concerted way. And the glaring systemic inefficiency was made clear. So many people with so many different motivations for their focus, all targeting the same problems, but very often working across purposes. Silos with no lateral communication. Oops, sorry. Just trying to get the... So, in a very self-serving move to address my own particular needs to serve my students more efficiently so they could serve the needs of the community, I realized it would make sense if all those very people who were interested in addressing community needs were brought into the same room so they could talk and learn from each other and scheme and be inspired by what worked. But what started off as a very utilitarian need has evolved into something quite different indeed. The idea of the Service Summit was first and foremost to bring people together to celebrate their service successes for the sole purpose of informing others so they would not have to go through the labor pains of reinventing the community service wheel. But as is becoming a most welcome theme in my life, the outcome was most unexpected. With my student leadership team, the first Service Summit was conceived. It brought together students from international schools, representatives from NGOs, businesses, government, and anyone else who had a passion for service to come to a teachers' conference-style format of keynote speakers and student and service provider-led workshop sessions to inform, inspire, and celebrate what we all do best. Bottom line, selfish, because I wanted my job to be simplified. Wrong. Without a doubt, this was the most professionally rewarding experience of my life. It had a transformative effect. It was the tipping point in my career, to be sure. In fact, when I look back, I see how even those unsuccessful modeling behaviors of my father were so instrumental for me in setting the stage to where I had ended up. After the success of that first celebration of Service Summit, the X factor was no longer an impediment. No longer was there that voice at the back of my head that would say, why would I even try that? Instead, it became, why wouldn't I try that? I remember the profound effect, for example, that one of the keynote speakers had on me and others. Tom was a young man working for Care for Children, a new NGO in Beijing which had the not-so-insignificant goal of finding foster parents for 1 million orphaned children in China. The sheer number is staggering, but as of January 2011, they had already placed 250,000 kids in foster care. That's in less than a decade. What is perhaps more amazing is that the whole concept of foster care was virtually unknown in China before they introduced it. While this is inspiring in itself, what has stuck with me most since that keynote address was Tom's top tips. Here was a 25-year-old espousing the secrets of life as if he had had it all figured out. Well, in at least one area he did. I think it was buried innocuously somewhere in there at number 3 or 4, but Tom suggested that if you have 20% of an idea, go for it. Don't wait for all the details to be in order for you to start. Don't be hounded by self-doubt or crippled by that nagging voice saying you shouldn't try. Get that spark, get the vision, and then go crazy. Simple and rather cliche almost, but right on the money, because Tom had, with his simple suggestion, summed up what my experience over the past few years had been in conjuring up, organizing, and hosting this event. And more powerfully, it gave me license, along with everyone else in that room, to dare to act on their own crazy ideas to change the world. I think we can call this secret number 1. After that summit, I had kids for weeks, literally lined up at my office door at lunchtime and break, coming to present a new idea they had for a service project, fundraising idea, or simply to reminisce about the impact the summit had on their lives. The school newspaper described the community service program after that as a growth industry. Ron Milne, a top-notch student leader in the school, and he was described as a future UN Secretary General by one of our summit participants, described the summit, and I quote, "This first-of-a-kind event left our school, as well as all the others in attendance, with countless ideas, a heightened awareness, and networking skills which has served us well through today. The creativity and passion of both sponsors and students led to the development of the first Community Service Summit at the American International School of Guangzhou. This unique, informative, and extremely successful forum allowed students to take the skills they had learned through the service program and share them with others from across the country. It also allowed students to greatly expand their horizons by learning from the success of other schools' programs. It was unique in that it combined presentations and workshops held by service organizations as well as student-led talks and training sessions. It allowed students and adults to come together on equal ground to share their ideas and learn from each other. This not only allowed for the creation of new approaches to raise awareness, but also made students feel like they were not only part of the solution, but the future of it. This summit provided a great forum for sponsors and students to come together and establish long-term connections and networks. Unquote. The closest metaphor I have for the effect this summit had on me and others was like plugging in the Christmas tree lights for the first time in the season. You spend all this time picking out the bushiest tree and make sure all the ornaments are hung well and that the bulbs are fresh, and then the time comes for you to plug it in. But you set the stage first by turning off the rest of the lights in the house for that extra special dramatic effect. And just like every Christmas since, as far back as I can remember, you have that anticipation of the wondrous glow of lights and the feeling it causes, and every single time it exceeds your expectation. Almost as if you had no idea it would be this great. That's what the Service Summit was like, and that's what every one of them has been like since. Now let's move back to Africa, where things get really interesting and is really the focus of why we're here. For those of you who have never been to Africa, particularly sub-Saharan Africa, I can honestly say you are missing something truly special. In many ways, it's an enigma, simultaneously exalting and humbling and cruel and kind. There is a rawness, an urgency, with humanity ever present and a beauty that is simply inexplicable. Carl Sagan described the image of Earth from 4 billion miles away taken by the Voyager spacecraft as it left the solar system. Sagan writes, and I quote, and it's a little long, but it's important. Look at that. Look again at that dot. That's here. That's home. That's us. On it, everyone you love, everyone you know, everyone you ever heard of, every human being who ever was, lived out their lives. The aggregate of our joy and suffering, thousands of confident religions, ideologies, and economic doctrines, every hunter and forager, every hero and coward, every creator and destroyer of civilization, every king and peasant, every young couple in love, every mother and father, hopeful child, inventor and explorer, every teacher of morals, every corrupt politician, every superstar, every supreme leader, every saint and sinner in the history of our species lived there, on a mote of dust suspended in a sunbeam. The Earth is a very small stage in a vast cosmic arena. Think of the rivers of blood spilled by all those generals and emperors so that, in glory and triumph, they could become the momentary masters of a fraction of a dot. Think of the endless cruelties visited by the inhabitants of one corner of this pixel on the scarcely distinguishable inhabitants of some other corner, how frequent their misunderstandings, how eager they are to kill one another, how fervent their hatreds. Our posturings, our imagined self-importance, the delusion that we have some privileged position in the universe are challenged by this point of pale light. Our planet is a lonely speck in the great enveloping cosmic dark. In our obscurity, in all this vastness, there is no hint that help will come from elsewhere to save us from ourselves. Humbling indeed, and often important in putting things into their proper perspective, particularly in Africa, which has witnessed its own tragic excesses in the past and continues to this day. Somalia, of course, being the most obvious case in point. But from the vantage of the day-to-day grind on the ground in the tangled and intertwined mix that is humanity, this distant perspective serves no one. In fact, it is this sort of scaling, this distance, that seems to have been the vantage point that has justified and fostered the paternalistic approaches to aid in Africa in the past, and indeed the reason for me thinking my father was likely insane for ever thinking we should bring some dirty, smelly, homeless person into our home to join us for dinner. It was probably even the basis of my first attempts at sponsoring a kid in Colombia. Here I was, relatively rich, and therefore better off, or just better, with the power, because let's be honest, that's what it boils down to save that kid or fix his unfortunate condition. And as noble as our intentions may be, they are wrought with the danger of dependency and doom. Never will the cycle of poverty be broken if we, those with money and resources, think we are above those who have none. Only when we can look them straight in the eyes and honor them and forge sustainable partnerships can we ever expect things to change. And I didn't figure that out until I returned to Africa for a second time. After 6 years in China, we moved on to Uganda, where we hosted the first African Service Summit in 2009. It was where I had the most inspiring privilege to have my invitation to Keynote accepted by Dr. Jane Goodall. Remember those National Geographic magazines I discussed earlier? Imagine the impact that had on me, and more importantly, an entire delegation of summiteers from across Africa. Jane Goodall, the person who so many years ago was selected along with Diane Fossey and Baruti Galdikas by Louis Leakey, the famous paleontologist, to go into some of the last remaining wilds on Earth and study the 3 great apes and forever change man's perspective of his privileged place in the animal kingdom. And Jane Goodall has been one example of the enduring secrets of success of the summits. Find exceptional keynote speakers who have the ability to galvanize thoughts and minds and make everyone in that room believe that 20% of an idea is just plenty to get started on action. That summit in Uganda took place in 2009, as I said. I'm going to skip over that if you don't mind. Oh, that's not a video. Sorry. There's Jane. We're currently entering our 4th iteration on the continent. The next was hosted at the American International School of Lusaka in 2010, where the exceptional Susan Lacey and her leadership team set the bar very high and had the young Austin Gutwin from Hoops of Hope and Kimmy Weeks as keynotes. From Kimmy's website, it reads, Kimmy Weeks has worked to alleviate poverty and human suffering in Africa and around the world since he was 14 years old. Kimmy was born in Liberia, 1981. When he was 9, Kimmy came face to face with civil war, human suffering, and death. Over the years, Kimmy has formed partnerships and led organizations that have provided education to thousands of students in West Africa, lobbied the disarmament of over 20,000 child soldiers, and provided health care and recreation supplies to children. Those are Kimmy's written words. When you meet him, however, you feel empowered and transformed. You are made to feel that you can do anything you set your mind to. In 2001, Claire Dietrichs and her awesome team at the American International School of Maputo, with the help of the amazing Sharon Peters, our moderator for today's session, put on a fantastic summit, which, among other keynoters, featured Graça Machel, a remarkable Mozambican woman who is Nelson Mandela's current wife and whose life story and vision and compassion kept us riveted to our seats. Another was a young woman named Natasha Yogachandra, who as a kid started collecting library books to send to needy kids around the world. Her idea was so modest and so simple, and now she works directly with these community partners, not from afar, but on the ground, and the cumulative effect of her efforts has been incredible. And the upcoming ASA Global Issues Service Summit at the American International School of Johannesburg in 2012, coordinated by Desiree Quilty Brown and her outstanding organizing team, will have Mark Heelberger, co-founder of Free the Children, as the main keynote. Personally, he's been on my hit list of people I must meet after I met his brother Craig in Hong Kong a few years ago. What these people all have in common is not their superhuman personas, which we like to imagine from afar. It's simpler than that. They are really just people, but their unique ability is to make us feel that what they have accomplished in their lives can be achieved by us all as well. When we listen to them, it empowers us to say, yes, I can. And that's the first step. Without that positive self-recognition, without that confidence in our own abilities and our own worth, then we're dead in the water. And the same is true with that relationship I discussed earlier with Africa. If we treat others as if we are better than them, individuals as well as countries, then there is no hope that our contributions will move forward in any positive way. Next, and this is directly related to secret number 2, empower your own students by giving them positions of leadership, both during the summit and throughout all the entire service learning experiences. Teach them how to be leaders, model it, provide opportunities for them to practice and lead. And from Ron Milne again, I quote, "Service clubs placed a great amount of importance on student leadership and guidance as well as encouraging teamwork. Students were given a lot of freedom to be creative and innovative with both service initiatives and fundraising. I remember this having a profound effect on my involvement as I enjoyed being encouraged to think outside the box as well as feeling as if I was working on something I had had a role in developing. I left Guangzhou with strong leadership abilities, a burning passion, and enthusiasm for the cause." Unquote. If you feel they can do it, they will, and often a whole lot better than we can. A new element that was introduced in Uganda, and one that I had wanted to start during the first summit in China, but simply did not have the organizational skills or the time to pull it off, was the Day of Service. By all accounts, this sets the service summits far apart. While students, teachers, NGOs, government reps, and socially responsible corporations come together face-to-face to talk about service, which is still critically important to get the range of ideas that work, what is so unique and powerful is the action that follows during the Day of Service. Imagine if the G8 leaders met for a few days and then actually went out into the community to plant trees or paint a mural in an orphanage. Imagine if at the World Economic Forum in Davos, Switzerland, participants stepped away from their shrimp cocktails and $1,000 a night rooms and actually acted. Words without action amount to nothing. As a parenthetical note, teachers' conferences are largely ineffective modes of professional development, comparatively speaking, because little in the way of sustainable application takes place afterwards. There's some research to support that. That very fact was used as a justification for bringing in the service day for the summit in the first place. There is something truly awe-inspiring to see 200 people or more, teachers, students, keynoters, and others, go out all at once to visit previously partnered service locations around the cities and plant trees with some local farmers, hold hands with cancer patients at a hospice, sing songs with kids at the orphanage, learn how to make more environmentally friendly stoves, build a new classroom wall alongside the teachers and students of a small rural African school, and so much more. Imagine, after 2 days of keynote addresses and attending workshops and presenting your own ideas on how to change the world, and then the next day going out and actually doing it. That is powerful. Another element, and perhaps one of the most significant in its message of bridging that divide between us and them, was the introduction of the Golden Hearts Award in Uganda, and has carried on for the other summits afterwards. This is more than a community outreach initiative. It was designed to identify and celebrate local community service youth leaders in the host country, bring them to the summit to work side by side with our privileged international school participants in the workshop rooms as well as in the fields planting trees on service day, to model the importance of partnerships. This was not a token attempt at appeasing the locals or throwing them a bone. This was an authentic attempt at engaging and partnering with youth leaders, those who are truly in a position to affect sustainable change in their own communities in the long run, and in a manner based on reciprocity. This reciprocal partnership based on mutual benefit cannot start out with us thinking we are doing these local kids a favor by bringing them into our privileged fold, feeding them for a few days, taking some photo shoot, and that's the end of it. If that's all it is, we have failed. To be honest, this is the one area of the summit that is continuing to develop, but we're getting there. And I know it is the essence of the future of the success of where the summit goes, and is so aligned with the global education collaborative goals. Let's hear what Emmanuel Niyonzima, a Golden Heart Scholar from Uganda, has to say long after the summit. I quote, "I was appointed as the chairman of the student council at my school in June this year. I had to use strategies to engage students in a number of voluntary services. Under my leadership, I have to engage the counselors in activities. This involves cleaning the school and areas outside, promoting HIV/AIDS awareness among the students. We also use Straight Talk," this is a local radio show for youth in Kampala, "to share ideas about healthy issues. We are now planning to mobilize funds and make a donation to Nsambia Babies Home. Michael, as a former Golden Heart winner, I will not rest until I put all that I have learned from the Service Summit Africa into action. The summit changed me for real, and I want to change others too, with the help of God and your support. I also request you to one day allow us to come and provide community service at your school." I took away one simple thing from Service Summit Africa, and that is to go forth and change the world. Unquote. Where I knew we had hit on something so powerful in our formula was when one of the Golden Heart scholars in Lusaka reflected in front of the entire delegation what he was going to take away from the summit. He was a 17-year-old local African kid, completely out of his element, by standing in the auditorium of the rich American International School, and he told us what was going to happen. He outlined a strategic plan of collaborative action that he was going to implement with his fellow Golden Heart colleagues and newfound partners upon leaving the summit to ensure that the lessons they learned at the summit would be put into action. Are you kidding me? Talk about inspiring. Every one of my students left that student with the echoes of that young man's words of inspiration, which would forever challenge their views that the locals needed our help. On the contrary, we learned then, and we are continuing to learn now, that those who we often start out thinking are people who need our help actually turn out to be people who teach us the most valuable lessons in life. And maybe this goes back to my inherent selfish nature, I'm not sure, but what I have come to understand most emphatically, that in these interactions, in these partnerships, in these adventures of the human condition, I have gained so much more than I have contributed. They don't need our disembodied money from afar. They don't need our pity. They don't need our help with a capital H. What they need is to be treated with respect, to be honored, and to be engaged as partners. And just as Sagan recognized our ultimate insignificance, I think in some ways we must reframe that perspective when we, as Westerners, ride in and think we're saving the world, when in fact we are only a small, insignificant part of that whole beautiful pale blue dot, trying to survive with all the rest. So what do we have so far? 20% of an idea, inspiring keynote. Student leaders will have opportunities to be immersed in the local communities, recognizing and supporting youth leaders, and creating partnerships with the host country, and the day of service. I hope you recognize by now that I've been engaged in a bit of jocularity when I characterize these ideas as secrets. They are simply ideas that, when combined under the right circumstances and with the right group of people supporting along the way, and let me emphatically remind you that none of this was possible without the countless people who were part of its evolution, some pretty cool things can happen. Take a look at this next slide. Four summits from 2007 to 2011, one more in 2012. Dozens of schools from dozens of countries participating, hundreds of students and teachers, inspiring workshop and keynote addresses, thousands of hours of service with the community, and numerous stories of people being transformed by the experience. But we can't stop there. While our efforts to date have been very successful and have brought together lots of passionate people, we still have a long way to go in order to realize our vision of sustainable change in Africa. The summits are one part of the strategy, and we want them to be the very best they could possibly be to support that. One of the areas we have recognized that needs attention is the degree of collaboration in between the summits, which themselves need to become self-sustaining beyond the founding efforts. Several strategic initiatives have come out of our discussions. First, after the summit in Uganda, Susan Lacey and I decided that the sustainability of the Service Summit ideals and goals, including the Service Day, Golden Hearts, and more, would be more likely if we tapped into the Global Issues Network, which was started in Luxembourg by Clayton Lewis and which was based on Richard's book, High Noon, 20 Global Issues and 20 Years to Solve Them. If you haven't read it, it's a must. So in the 2010 summit, the name was changed to the Global Issues Service Summit to reflect that new relationship. The next thing we accomplished was the creation of the Global Issues African Network of Teachers for Service, or GIANTS, whose mission is to support the teaching of global issues and promote the development of sustainable service projects at schools in Africa. Please join us on our Ning site, and it's up on the final slides. The link as well, as the last three websites, as I said, are included in the last slides. What our steering committee hopes is that this forum would be a means to more openly communicate with each other, share our ideas, and to finally bridge the isolation that so many of us had felt in our schools on the continent. Although still in its infancy, our GIANTS Ning site has incredible potential for collaboration, professional development, sharing of resources, and so much more. I am completely humbled by the sophistication of the Global Education Collaborative and what they are accomplishing with this conference. And has been my habit to use, or probably steal, great ideas and apply them in new contexts. I hope to use many of the great ideas from this conference in our own efforts on the continent. You know what, better yet, I would love to forge a partnership where our shared visions for collaboration, service, and global issues education would work together synergistically. I think this is an opportune time With the growing stability of internet technologies in Africa and the fact that the fiber optic cable is making its way inward from East Africa, among other areas, it won't be too long, relatively, that Africa is wired. That being said, we must first bridge the digital divide, which is more evident in Africa than anywhere else on Earth. Nevertheless, we press on. One of the most recent strategic initiatives which we have made considerable headway on is the long-term partnership with the Association of International Schools of Africa, or ASA. ASA's mission is to facilitate school effectiveness and to inspire student learning in the international schools of Africa by promoting communication, collaboration, and professional development. Its networks expand across the continent with over 42,000 students and 2,500 teachers and administrators. Not attempting to forge a partnership with this regional educational hub, which shares our goals, would be foolhardy. This is something I've been working on since before the first summit. This whole idea, unproven on the continent, was a hard sell to all audiences, and I found myself actually begging people to attend the first event in Uganda. Once they experience it, though, and see the power of what the summits can accomplish for schools, for teachers, for students, and local communities, there are few valid arguments against it. Lusaka and Mozambique received sponsorship support from ASA, and the American International School of Johannesburg in 2012 marks the official launch of the first ASA Global Issues Service Summit. We are very proud of that. Some of the areas where we want to improve or expand are as follows. Vastly increase our Giants membership with educators within Africa and beyond. We want to show the world that Africa and the ASA GIST summits can be the most inspiring, the most diverse and effective events of their kind on the planet. The Service Day and the Golden Hearts Initiative are testament to that. We want educators and students to look at Africa as a destination to learn how service learning and global issues education comes together in the most profound ways and certainly in the most exciting environments around. We want to facilitate partners within Africa and beyond. Why not have schools in North America work year-round with in-country international schools who are already connected with local organizations and communities? So many partnerships could be forged using an intermediary such as this. For example, let's say a school in Missouri wants to team up with a school in Uganda but has no idea how to start. The International School of Uganda has countless connections of local schools with which the school in the U.S. would love to develop such a relationship. It's win-win for all parties. We want to forge more meaningful and lasting relationships with many more community youth leaders and partners. We want to learn from their ideas and have our students enriched by local solutions to issues that affect the globe. This is done through greater opportunities of immersion in local communities. This will come about through greatly expanded Golden Hearts programs that do not occur once a year and only at the host summit schools. These can happen year-round and across the continent at every participating school. And let's not stop at international schools. We need to build stronger partnerships with those local schools and have our own mini summits as well, and often. We also want to greatly expand our promotion and use of social media like Facebook, Twitter. These technologies are obviously the tools of choice by youth, so we need to exploit that. We need a comprehensive strategic plan to move forward in this area. The next one is increased efforts to seek long-term financial support. Again, this is not for the sake of throwing money at local needs, but to realize a vision to support collaborative partnerships across the continent. Sponsors gain from the exposure of their social responsibility, and partners gain from the resources to better collaborate. Win-win. Next, we ourselves need to take an audit to ensure we are modeling best practices. I look back almost with disgust at the first summit where the post-lunch scene was a sea of plastic cups strewn across the lawn. We need to get our own environmental house in order so as to model it to all participants. I'm speaking more to myself than anybody else. We recognize this, and subsequent summits have done a lot of improvements each year. But our vision for the future is to see a summit that offsets its carbon footprint entirely. The transcontinental flights, transportation, menu choices, and more can all be part of the formula to ensure our participation is not doing more harm than good. That has been the unfortunate legacy of foreign support in Africa for decades, and we need to set the example to stop that. As I say these words, I'm almost discouraged by the scope of what still needs to be accomplished. Almost, but not quite. The fuel that keeps me going, and I know many, many others who are committed to this shared vision, is that the dividends are so very rich indeed. At its core, it is about kids and communities and the future. In closing, I think our lives are a long series of crossroads, traversed by countless decisions and choices. Sometimes wrong turns may lead us through doubling back or over more difficult terrain back to the same path we were originally on. Sometimes, though, our choices lead us to places we never expected to arrive. I often wonder where I'd be today if I had joined my dad in his efforts to set an example and bring in that person who was down in his luck and maybe just needed a pat on the back, a warm home-cooked meal, and some unlikely stranger to show him the respect and care he may have needed to get back on track. I don't know. Maybe I'd still be back in suburban Mississauga, but with a much greater appreciation of the humanity there. And what if I had never volunteered and had that chance to put those 2 drops in the mouth of that screaming infant in Abidjan so long ago? Again, I'm not sure. And I wonder where I'd be today if I hadn't listened to that voice in my head back in China saying, why not? Give it a shot. When I first came up with a silly little idea, bringing people together to try to change the world. I honestly don't know. What I do know is that in my case, I am where I was meant to be. I just never could have envisioned I would take the path I took, or more importantly, that I would be looking back upon this journey with quite the same perspective that I have right now. Thanks for listening. Here's some of the resources and links. Susan, do you have the slideshow? Is it at the end there? Or Sharon, are you there? I'm just going to wait for Sharon up here. She's the moderator, and she's prepared a little bit of a slideshow. I just want to open it up as she's doing that. If there's any questions, I'm sorry we went a little longer than I expected, but if there's anyone out there who has some questions, let me know. I'm just giving you permissions with the audio. Sharon, are you around? Matt, you asked me a question. Oh, Sharon lost her moderator status. That's not good. Okay, I'm giving you all audio. Try to test it if you see your microphone beside your name. Anybody there? I can't hear anybody.
Okay, I'm back.
I turn off your microphone to hear people. When we have 2 people talking at once, if they don't have headphones, then you're going to get feedback.
First of all, were there any questions out there? I see Sharon lost her moderator. I'm just going back. Mike, what do you need for the next summit to get to the next level? That's Matt. Lots of different things, Matt. I think first and foremost, continue on with those developing those partnerships. I think some financial support in getting those programs of collaboration that we want to get started. I'd love to continue the conversation with you. I know we don't have too much time. We've got about 5 minutes left. But Matt, feel free to send me an email to continue the conversation if you like. Just going through some of the questions here. Thanks, Marcy. I appreciate that. Send me an email. I'd love to continue the conversation with you. Oh, yeah, William, there's so many regions in Peru. I couldn't agree more. I love Peru. It's a beautiful place, and this is spot on in so many different areas as well. Who else we got here? Sorry, I'm just trying to go through all the questions or comments. If you do leave your email address on the site, I will be sure to get back to you. Anybody else there? Sharon, are you around? I don't know why you can't talk. Thank you, Marcy. I appreciate that.
Okay. Yes, I can talk now. Okay. I guess I didn't have permission. Hi, Mike. That was fantastic. Really, really inspirational to hear it. And as someone who has been to a Global Issues Service Summit and seen the profound impact it's had on our school, the kids are still talking about it. The kids are now asking, are we going to Joburg? Are we going to Johannesburg for the next one? They're lining up to go. It had that kind of effect on them, and so it's really a great opportunity for you to be here, Mike, because I know how connected many of these people are that are dropping in and listening to this and who may not have known of these initiatives. And I think this is an important opportunity to make these connections and make these links between us. And as Lucy suggested, maybe start thinking about forming a coalition so that we can drive things forward and go deeper with longer, sustainable types of projects that get right to the core rather than surfacey type projects. So thank you so much for what you shared. I know it was inspiring to me, and I'll be passing the link on.